Okay, I think we're going to start. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I would like to dedicate this shiur to the memory of Orly Mansbach Shapiro. Those of you who are from Renana will maybe know her, the daughter of Stewie and Shelley Shapiro. A beautiful young girl, Neshama Tahora, 31 years old, and succumbed to a long illness and very, very deep tragedy for many people. She was an amazing person. She had 5 children, and I don't know that she ever said a negative word about anyone or anything. So this should be Aliyat Neshama for her. Her funeral is tomorrow in Shiloh. Well, this is, of course, a very full parsha, Lech Lecha. There is so much to talk about. I think last year, when I looked back at notes, we had a very interesting discussion about Hagar. And I think it was either this parsha or the next week's parsha talking about this very fascinating person, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to deal with another interesting person, at least as a sidelight, and that is Abraham's nephew, Lot. There is a very, really kind of a strange chapter in here, Perek Yud Daled, and it didn't take too long after the world is created when we have to deal with the subject of war. Just coming back from a trip, Janice Batansky was with, should vouch for the trip. And, you know, when you talk about, it was to Bordeaux, when you talk about the history of Europe, it's really all about wars. There's so many places and, you know, events that are based upon the wars that took place, certainly in Europe. And war, it seems, just comes along with humanity. And so we create the world, we get through the Noah crisis, and then already in this parsha, we introduce the subject of war. And it's a fascinating story that is very, very difficult to understand exactly what's going on in this story. There are basically, it's the war of the 4 kings against the 5 kings. In this case, it's hard to know who is right and who is wrong in this war. One of the kings is the king of Sodom. Now, I'll go through a little bit about this, but you can't imagine that the king of Sodom is on the side of right. And yet it is on that side to which Abraham is going to throw his support. And indeed is going, at least according to what we read here, he's going to kind of turn the tide of war in favor of these kings. So I'll read you a little bit about it. I always compare this, for those of you who remember, to the war between Serbia and Croatia. And I never really understood either what it's about or who was right and who was wrong. I know that I think the United States supported Croatia, but as Jews, we do not have very good memories of Croatia. They were absolutely brutal to the Jews during World War II. And Serbia was actually quite cooperative and helpful to Jews. So here you have a kind of reversal of fortune. In any case, here is just a brief synopsis of this story, that there are 5 kings who basically are ruling a very wide area, and they are either controlling these countries, these other city or city-states, or they are paying tribute to these powerful 5 kings. So the 4 kings, which includes the king of Sodom, they had served 12 years. They had been under the control of the 5 kings, and they decide that they're going to revolt. And they fight a 13-year war. And basically, in this war, they're getting schmettered. And they're not very good fighters. But then something happens that's going to affect this whole kind of strange war. The 5 kings capture Lot, and Abraham is told, he's still Abraham, and he's told that Lot, who lived in Sodom, as we know, has been taken captive. And indeed, it says, at least, I don't know, it's in the Gemara, the Medrash, that they put him in a cage because they wanted to show him off as we have captured the great Avram's nephew, Lot. Avram was already fairly well known in this part of the world, and they considered this a major prize. Avram hears this, and he goes to war against these 5 kings. He takes 318 soldiers. Now, this is interesting in the sense that, well, you're thinking, well, how can they really accomplish anything with 300 plus soldiers against 5 different kings, each of whom has a domain, probably contributing, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of soldiers. But it's kind of almost a foretelling of the future that with a very small army, sometimes you can accomplish major things that would absolutely astound other people, that were able to fight back and win with a relatively small army. You see this, of course, this happens, as we know, with the Hashmonaim, the Maccabim, when they too have a relatively small kind of ragtag army fighting against mighty Greece and are able to win. And you might say that this pattern even extends to the Revolutionary War in America, where they were definitely outnumbered by the British, and yet the colonists won and were able to expel the Brits, sorry Brits, and establish America ever since. So this is kind of what we're seeing here. Someone to say, and this is again a medrash, that Avram, who took along Eliezer, his faithful servant, since Eliezer in Gematria equals 318, they want to say that it was just he and Eliezer alone. Well, that might be a little bit too hard to swallow, but clearly it was the righteousness of Avram that turned the tide. Now, there's a couple things to say here. First of all, here we see the first war that we're told about in the Torah is in order to redeem a hostage. Lot is being held hostage. So you see how serious it is when hostages are held, that Abraham risks his life. Okay, it's true, it's his nephew, but he is setting the tone and saying that you have to do whatever you need to do to redeem hostages. I shouldn't say whatever, any price. Certainly that's not true. You don't pay any price. But clearly you see Abraham rushes away. He takes time away. He's involved in trying to teach the world to believe in monotheism. And yet he drops all that. He says there is nothing more important than to go and save a life. In this case, his nephew's life. And I don't want to make a distinction between Jews and non-Jews, but you maybe can make that argument. But clearly he doesn't say, well, I'm doing something more important. I'm doing the work of the Lord and I can't stop. No. And I guess I think that should not be lost on us, of the absolute necessity in the eyes of God, and later on clearly legislated in the Torah, then you stop what you're doing and you go and rescue captives, and you certainly would fight in order to preserve your country. So this whole controversy taking place now is something that I think in almost every generation, people would say it's ludicrous. Obviously, when your country or home is being threatened, when people are being held hostage, that's the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth priority. And that's what you need to do. In any case, and by the way, let's remember that Lot is not exactly your model Jewish citizen. He chose to live in stone. He chose to live in a horrible place with evil people. And although he was Avram's nephew, nevertheless, one could make the case that Avram could have said, you know what? He chose to live there. And as much as I'd like to help him, well, he kind of made his bed. Now he has to sleep in it. But Avram doesn't say that. And, you know, you see sometimes, and I hate to say that people even thought this, let alone wrote it, that people who were at the Nova Music Festival saying, well, you know, they shouldn't have been there. It was Shabbat Simchat Torah. What were they doing there? They should have been, if not in Beit Knesset, they should have at least been home, etc. But we see that when it comes to saving lives, you don't make those distinctions. That's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If he wants to deal with it, that's his responsibility, but ours is certainly to save lives. And we lost many, many lives, including an overabundance of religious soldiers, to first go and rescue these people, and now to go into Gaza and look for the hostages, and in some cases die fighting to redeem and rescue the hostages. But that's what you do. So I think this first war really has a lot of examples, a lot of lessons for us for all the wars to come. Well, there's more to the story, though, than meets the eye, because the kind of backstory to what's going on in this war is that Avram, as I said before, was becoming very well known. And from our point of view, he was doing something very noble and very righteous, trying to change the world from its ever-present belief in idolatry and bringing people closer to God, primarily through a belief in one God. And he was making a lot of inroads. Hanefesh asher asu b'charan, that he was getting through to people. And this was very, very threatening for essentially all of those people, because they did not lead a moral life. Their whole raison d'etre, their whole philosophy was might makes right. If I can raise up an army and I can be stronger than my neighbor, I will take away what my neighbor has and claim it for my own, which may have been really all of these 9 kings together, but we'll leave that aside for the moment. So here comes Avram, soon to be Abraham, and he is preaching the morality of God that says, no, you cannot just take something away from someone if they own it. You have to set up courts, which is part of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. You cannot wantonly murder, which is part of Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. You cannot simply steal what you want. That also goes against Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach. And he becomes, again, the voice of morality. And this is not taken well by these countries. They don't need to hear and have someone who is going to maybe start a revolution, a moral revolution, where suddenly people will have to abide by these kinds of laws and rules. And so their plan has nothing really to do with Lot, although some may have considered him an interloper. But according to this idea in the commentaries, they took him in order to lure Avraham into this war. Why? Because they were certain that war corrupts. That as good a person as Avram is, and as squeaky clean and pristine he is, if he gets involved in a war, he's going to fall to the temptation that so many others do, that most others do, and he's going to commit all kinds of indiscretions, maybe even atrocities, because that's what war does. He's going to take things that don't belong to him. He's maybe going to kill people he doesn't really need to kill. He's going to conduct himself in a very immoral fashion. That's their plan. And once he does that, they'll be able to say, hey, you're no better than we are. So stop preaching morality to us and telling us about what's right and wrong, because look what you do in war. And that's their plan. But in the case of Avram, it fails. It's a very classic and very well thought out plan, because this is indeed what happens in war. The indiscretions in war are well known throughout the ages. And if you want the ultimate example of immoral and obscene behavior in war, you just simply look at what happened in Gaza. Every type of possible crime was committed there. Not just rape, but and I don't want to be graphic, the rape of living women, the rape of women who they had killed, burning down houses with people in them. I don't want to go. I think all of us are familiar with the atrocities, somewhat familiar with the atrocities they committed, all because they felt we have superior weapons and we've been radicalized. Maybe they gave them certain drugs to use, but they went in thinking all is fair in war. I don't know about love, but all is fair in war. And we're going to do whatever we feel like doing. So Avram is lured into this war as these people say, let's see how moral he acts when he's put into the temptation of being able to kill, pillage, rob, steal, rape, etc. And of course, we know what happens, that Avram does not act with any indiscretion. And not only that, when the war is over, Abraham says in this very famous encounter, when he has recaptured Lot, repatriated Lot, and he comes before the king of Sodom. First of all, he's blessed by Malchi Tzedek, the king of, here it's called Shalem, but it's really Yerushalayim, we say. And he is a believer in Hashem. And he gives him this bracha, and he says to him, Baruch Avram l'kel elyon, konei shamayim ba'aretz, Baruch el elyon, etc., ve'iten lo ma'aser mikol. And then he says he's going to give him a tenth of everything. The king of Sodom then chimes in and says, well, if you give me the people, harachush kachlach, you take their possessions. So here you see that even after this war is over and Abraham has repatriated Lot, and in a sense, he's come out of this squeaky clean, you see they're still trying to pervert him and to say to him, well, you know what? To the victor go the spoils, and maybe it did belong to other people, but you take them. Just give me the people. But Abraham says, he lifts up his hand. Here we have this idea of being sworn in, right? In January, when you see the new president sworn in, they're going to lift their hand up. And he says, "Imichut v'atzroch nal, ve'imekach mikol asher lach." From if so much as from the a thread to a shoe strap, in other words, from head to toe, I'm not going to take anything. V'lo tomar ani hasharti, so that you won't say, I made Avraham rich and not Hashem. And you see, he's resisting this temptation. And therefore he says, Bil adai, it's not going to happen. Far from it. You can only pay back the what expenses you need for the people who accompanied Avram. This phrase, imichut v'atzroch nal, has been very nicely explained that the chut, and we think about the way people dress then, you can picture an Arab chic. So the chut is the thread that is on top of their kafia, and the sroch nal is the sandal, which is made out of leather. It's a shoe strap that you wrapped around your feet. So that's what he was saying. And it's kind of a way that people interpret that this type of dress that we see today in the Muslim world, in the parts at least of the Arab world, that it's very much the way that Avram probably was dressed. He had the headdress, and it was kind of held on with a string. And in the Arab world, the color of the string can be a sign of how high up you are in the nation. And the sandals, which today Naot makes some very fancy sandals, but those were just made out of leather and string that they tied onto a piece of leather. So essentially, he's saying from the top of my head to the tip of my toe, I really don't want to take anything. I did this because it was the right thing to do, and Hashem will reward me. And I think this is part of the reason why the Torah goes to very great length in order to tell us what we call in Hebrew tahor haneshek, the purity of arms, which is not only about when you're allowed to shoot and not to shoot, but it also deals with what is moral and not moral. The Torah has many different things that we're told you are allowed or not allowed to do, that you can't encircle an enemy from all four sides, you have to leave a route of escape, that you can't destroy fruit trees, that you have to bring a shovel so that when you go to the bathroom, you can cover it, and things that usually in war, people aren't thinking about at all. But the Torah wants us to have this, to know that even in extreme situations, not when we're sitting in the Beit Midrash or in shul or with on the street, but when you're in an extreme situation, that's where it's most important to, I guess, kind of repel the instinct that you have to take advantage and make sure you behave properly. There was a Arab commentator that once made this most outrageous statement that seeing the statistics that Israeli soldiers do not commit rape when they go into these situations, and so they couldn't deal with it. So she said, this is an example of how much the Jews hate the Arabs that they won't even rape them. And obviously this is, just anti-Semitism, but it confirms the fact that we conduct ourselves in a very, very pure way. And I've told before, I'll just repeat it in conclusion, that when Ari Hashem Yikom Damo was in the army, so they were going house to house looking for weapons in one of the villages, and essentially every house has weapons. And as he was looking for it, he found hidden in a secret place, along with weapons, a fairly large amount of money, wad of American money, of dollars. When you see what's going on in the tunnels, you see there are all kinds of currencies that they keep. In any case, he brought the money to his commanding officer, and he said, "What do I do with this?" And the officer said, "You return it to where you found it. We're here to search for weapons. We're not here to search for money." Now, many people would say, well, they'll use the money to buy more weapons, etc. But the Faked was reacting to what the rules were and saying, no, you cannot wantonly steal something. That could be their money that they're saving up for whatever. And therefore, we're not saying that they're terrorists. We're saying that, yes, they have weapons because virtually every house has a weapon, and they were confiscating them, but they weren't saying these people were terrorists. And therefore, he said, return the money, which he did. And it's just one example of the kind of character and integrity that our soldiers have. And there are 1,000 more examples of going to great lengths not to hurt somebody who is not one of the combatants, and essentially helping people. And everything we do, many people would say we go way over the line in warning people that we're coming, in protecting people, and not shooting in situations where innocent people will be killed. Of course, the world is topsy-turvy, so it turns everything around, and the perpetrators of atrocities blame those who are innocent. But that's nothing that we don't know already. But this idea, things we're experiencing today, we see that they didn't just begin when Israel became a state and had an army, or even earlier. We see that this dates all the way back to Avram, who's trying to set a precedent that there is a way to conduct yourself even in the most difficult and challenging and tempting of situations. And that may very well be why he was so successful in convincing people that there is a better way of life, that might makes right, and impacting a whole civilization to come closer to God and to at least some basic form of a moral baseline, a moral conduct and behavior that ultimately Hashem wants for the entire world. He's the God of all people. He's the God of the whole world. And he wants a certain minimum adherence to basic decency and morality. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and Bezrat Hashem, see you back next week. Same time, same place, 5:30 in Israel, 10:30, those who are tuning in from New York. And we should only have smachot, bezorot tovot. Our hostages should hopefully be repatriated, just as Lot was. And Bezrat Hashem, all the wounded. And there's so many who are wounded, and it's such a difficult situation that we hope that they will be healed. And that is a long process, but one which we hope will be successful. So I'm going to end just by reading the tefillah for the Chayalim. Mishaberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov Yovarich and Chayalei Tzva Hagana Yisrael Haomdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Varei Eloheinu Migvul HaLevanon Va'ad Midbar Mitzrayim Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Lavo HaRava B'Yabasha Ba'Avir V'Yam Yitein Adonai Toivenu HaKamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifnehem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayaleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah U'Mikol Negu Machala V'Yishlach Bracha V'Atzlacha B'Chol Ma'asei Dehem Yad Berson Einu Tachtehem V'Yatrein B'Chet Yeshua V'Teret Nitzachon V'Kuyam B'Hem HaKatuv Ki Adonai Elohechem Holechim Lachem Lilachem Lachem Imoivechem Lo Shi'erchem V'Nomar Amen. Many thanks to Yassi, our host, and we look forward to seeing you again. Shabbat Shalom U'Barach.